Okay, so in this course, we're going to learn JavaScript in 1 hour, learn everything that you need and only what you need. No extra fluff in plain English. We're going to start with the developer console. This is the easiest way to write JavaScript code to start, and will allow you to focus on the code itself and not any tools. What you want to do is right-click on anywhere in the page and click Inspect. Once you click the Inspect button, a window should pop up and you're going to click the Console button. Once you've done that, open it up bigger and just zoom in to make it easier to see. The next thing we're going to talk about is data types. So the data types are the types of data that exist in JavaScript and the different format that they can exist in. As we're going through these data types, I want you to pause at the end of each one and practice in your console with ideas of how that data type can be used. Think of real-world situations and what can be represented as that data type. And just make a few examples. So until you feel comfortable with that data type and how it's represented in code with JavaScript. The first data type we're going to go over is a string. Some examples of a string include a person's name, a street address, a product name, and a product description. So string is anything which is meant to be represented as a text value. So we're going to go over some examples. So here's an example of a string of a person's name. It can be in double quotes or single quotes. And either way is a valid way of representing a string. So here we have my name as a string. Another thing could be a street address. So we have 123 Fake Street here. So again, strings can be names, as an example, product descriptions, product names, street addresses, can be anything that needs to be represented as a text value. So if it's supposed to be a text, it could be a string. That's the simplicity of it. Okay, so the next data type is number. And a number in JavaScript is anything that is meant to be represented as a number. So you can think of a person's age, a price of a product, anything that requires math or counting is represented in JavaScript as just the numbers themselves. So 23, for example. But it can also be a decimal, like 23.20. Now, you want to make sure that when you're defining numbers, it doesn't have any quotes around it. Once we put the quotes around it, it's now a string. So whether it's double quotes or single quotes. So you want to make sure it's just a number itself. I'm going to show you why that can be a problem. So if we were doing some sort of math operation, so 23 plus 23, it's 46. But if that was represented as a string of 23 plus 23, you see we get 2323 because the strings added together just joins them together as one single string. And it's no longer a math operation. So you just want to make sure that when you're using numbers, it is just a number itself and not a string. Okay, so the next data type is a Boolean. And a Boolean is just a true or false value in JavaScript. So it's kind of similar to a yes or no answer, right? And this will be very useful for us in later concepts in this video. And you can think of it like whether a person has a job, it's a true or false. If he has a job, a Boolean answer would be true. If he doesn't have a job, it would be false. So this is represented in JavaScript as true, the word's true, or the word's false, as an example, right? So it's true or false. Again, it's not a string, and it's just the words without the quotes, because they're very different. We'll find the different ways that Booleans are represented later on in this video. Okay, so null is the absence of a value in JavaScript. When a value can potentially have some sort of value, but in this case it doesn't, it would be represented as null. It's just a way of saying that something doesn't have a value. An analogy could be if a person is unemployed and they don't have a job, their job would be null. The next data type is undefined. Now, undefined is similar to null in the sense that it also implies a lack of a value. But null is usually something that's intentionally set, and undefined is generally used when something doesn't have a value, but it was never meant to have a value. Later on in this video, we'll show you more examples of undefined and null, but you can think of it as no value has been defined. An object is a very important data type. So it's a way of grouping similar things as a package, so to speak, together. There's overall object itself, and it has certain properties that describe what that object is. So you can think of it as a person, for example. If the person was an object, it would have certain properties about him. His age, his height, his weight, those would be details about this object. In an online order, for example, the order itself would be the object. The price, the shipping date, the products itself, those would be the object details. And we're going to explain what those things are right now. So an object is defined by the opening curly braces and the closed curly braces that you see here. And an object has a key value pair. And what that means is, as we see here in this code, the name part, that's the key. And the value is my name. So we have a key and a value. And a comma is put in place, and you can put another key, in this case, age. And age is the key, and 33 is the value. And you can see that in the first example, we have a string. And in the second example, we have a number as the value. So you can actually have different data types as the value in an object. So here, profession is the key, and software developer is the value. And again, software developer is provided as a value of a string, with the opening curly braces and the closed curly braces. So we have a string, a number, and a string. The main thing you want to understand here is that there are keys and there are values. And the values can be of any of the data types that we've discussed thus far. So in this case, profession, the key, has a string value. And just to provide more examples, so for a Boolean, I'm married, so we can say is married, and the value is true. So we have a Boolean value. And I don't have kids, so we can do has kids and false. So now we have numbers, strings, and Booleans. Now an example of null could be, let's say I don't have a favorite food. I like everything. So favorite food would be null, which means that there's no value that would describe what my favorite food is. So I'm going to show you an example of an object within an object. So if we want more details about what my profession is, we can set up an object. And within this object, we're going to create two keys. One of them is the years of experience with a value of 10 as a number. And the company, we're just going to say it's ACME. Now that's a string. So I just wanted to show you that an object's values can be any of the data types that we've previously discussed. Now that we've learned about the basics of objects, this is one I really want to make sure you spend a lot of time on practicing until you feel comfortable with all the concepts. What a key is, what a value is, the different data types, and how you write an object in JavaScript. So make some examples. It can be 10, 20 of them until you feel comfortable with what should be represented as an object and how you write an object in JavaScript. Okay, so an array is a collection of similar things. An array can be a list of strings, numbers, objects, or other arrays. It is used when there is more than one of something necessary. So you can think of if there is a big company and they have many employees. The employees would be represented as an array, right? Another example could be you're on some e-commerce website. The products are usually in a catalog, and that's a list of products that would be represented as an array. Or if you're on a single product page, there's usually multiple reviews. The reviews would be represented as an array. So it's when you have more than one of something, a list of them, and that's represented as an array. So how arrays are written in JavaScript is with the brackets. You can see there's an opening bracket and a closing bracket. And we can see here that the console is saying that it is an array. And we're going to do an example with strings. So if we have an array of product names, for example, product 1, comma, product 2, comma, product 3. And they're comma separated and they're represented as strings. We can have an array of numbers. For example, we have all these numbers with commas separating them. We can have an array of objects. So again, the opening curly braces and the closed curly braces. And we're going to set up some fake object details now. So we're going to create an array of employees using objects. So we're going to start with me, and my title is the software engineer. We're going to have employee number 2. And his title is that he's a project manager. And the last employee is employee number 3. And their title is CEO. So now we have an array of 3 objects in it. And this is to represent employees within a company. So we have the first object, which is me. And I have a name and I have a title. The concepts of objects are the same thing, except instead of just being one object, we now have 3 objects in an array. So you can also have an array with arrays as the items inside of the array. Now, this isn't very common, but I have seen it in certain situations, like if you're trying to plot information on a graph. For example, 0, 3, 1, 6, and 2, 10. So if you think of a graph, the 0 is the x, and the 3 is the y. Basically, just an example. So we have an array with 3 arrays inside of it, and we can see that each one of the children of the array is also an array, which has 2 numbers in it. So just want to show you that it is possible, although this specific thing is not very common. Okay, just like with objects, arrays are also very important and a little more advanced than some of the other data types. So spend the time, make 10 different arrays using different data types inside, and get an understanding and comfortableness with arrays and how you write them in JavaScript. Okay, so now we're going to talk about variables. Variables are a way to save a value temporarily, which can be reused in the code at a later point. This is something that is an essential building block to any application and any code in JavaScript. Okay, so we're going to declare a variable with the word let, and we're going to do let name equal my name. So now we create a variable called name, and we set it to equal the value Rafi. So we can now access this variable name, and we see that it gave us my name back as a result. So it stored that information temporarily. And we see that my name is specified as a string. So again, I type name, and we see that the variable still has a value. So now we're going to set the age. So we're going to create a variable called age, and we're going to set the variable value to 33 as a number. And you can ignore this undefined part. So again, we're going to type age, and we see that it holds the value 33. Okay, so now let's create an object. So we're going to create an object that's called person, and we're going to give it the keys of name and age, and we're going to fill in those details, and we see that the person variable has this object as its value. And I'm going to type it again. You can see it's still there. So it saved this value to this variable. Okay, so the simplicity is it's a way of storing information, as we see here. So name, age, person, they're all still there with the values that we assigned them. And because they were assigned with the word let, it means that we can change the value of them. So remember, we assigned let name equal Rafi. So now, if I want to change the name, I can. So I'm going to say name is equal to my full name. So we see that we're going to set name equal with this equal sign to my full name. And we see that now when I type name, we get my full name. And the original variable, the original value of the variable is different. Now it's my full name and not just my first name. So because we use let name, it allows us to change the value of the variable. And there are certain situations in code where this is really useful. So the other approach is this const keyword. And that is when you're declaring constants, right? Things that aren't changing within the code. Generally, if something is not changing, you set it up as a const. So here we're going to say that the channel name is my channel name. And we're going to try to change the value of this variable. And as I do that, you'll see that I get an error. You can't assign a new value to a variable that was declared as a constant with this const keyword. So it has to be a let. So if you need to change the value, you use the let keyword and not the const keyword. Okay, so now we're going to go over the different rules regarding these variables. So they can't start with a numerical value. So if we do let one name and we try to set that as the variable name, we're going to get an error because it can't start with a number. The other rule is that the variable name can't have a space in it. So if we do first name as 2 words, you'll see that we get an error as it's not allowed. Another important thing is that the variable names are case sensitive. So we're going to do first name in this format, which is called camel case, and first name just all lowercase. And you'll see that they have different values. So first name all lowercase, I get my name in lowercase. First name with the capital N, I get my name with a capital R. Because we declared them separately. Because they're case sensitive, we are able to declare them with the same name as different variables. Okay, so the next rule is that you can't use a hyphen in the variable name. So if we do first hyphen name, it's going to give us an error. However, you can do underscores, so you can do first underscore name, and that's okay. The last point about variable names is just that they should be meaningful. So if we're trying to save what the employee is in code, we wouldn't name the variable EMP. We're much better off doing employee name and setting the value to the employee name. This way, when you're looking at the code later on, just by looking at the variable name, you can kind of understand what the code is doing. So you want to make sure your variable names are descriptive. In this section, we're going to go more into objects and arrays and how you can use them. Okay, so I've set up this person object with a name, age, profession, and an employed key. So the first thing we're going to go over is how you can actually access the values within the object. To access the age property and see what the age of this person is, we would type person.age. And we see that the value of it is 33. So to access any of the keys on the object, you do person dot and then the key name. So now if we do person.employed, we see that we get true, which is a Boolean value as a result. And we see that it's coming from the object here. And we see that the value is true. So another way of accessing the properties on an object is with the brackets and a string inside of those brackets. So we can do person bracket age, and you see that we get 33, which again is accessing the value on the age key of the object. Now the dot notation is a little bit easier to use than the bracket notation, and it is personal preference, but generally the dot notation is used unless you cannot use it. The bracket notation is generally used when you don't know ahead of time what key is going to be accessed. So as an example, I'm going to demonstrate how that might work. So we're going to set up a variable which has a string value of employed. So now we can see that we can use person bracket what does he need to know as a variable, and what happens is the string value gets passed to the bracket notation as it's the variable value, and we see that it's the same as doing person.employed. Now this might happen in a case of, for example, you have some sort of dynamic situation where you need to access different parts of the object based on user input. You can assign that input to a variable and then access the properties on the object. I'm just demonstrating this briefly so you can see that it is a possibility. Okay, the next thing we're going to cover is that you can change the value of keys in an object. And I just want you to pay attention to the fact that even though we declare the object as a constant, we can still change the values of the keys. So we're going to do person.age equal 34. And now we're going to see if I look into the person object, we see that the age changed to 34. So you are able to change the values of the keys of an object. And we do that by using the equal sign. Okay, so the next thing I want to demonstrate is just the different data types again. So we're going to create an object within this object. So we're going to set up a person.job. And we're going to say the company is YouTube, as I'm creating content on YouTube. And I've been doing this less than a year. So we're going to say the years are 0. So now if I access that person object, we see that it has a job key. Object has a value, which has keys within it, company and years, which each have a value. To access those values, we can do person.job.company. We can also do it with the bracket notation like so. And you'll see that we get the values within that object. So if you have an object within an object, you just chain the dots or the bracket notations to access the data within that nested object. Okay, so one other thing I want to show you guys is undefined. A little bit more on that. So we see that the person object has certain keys. So now if we try to access a key that doesn't exist, for example, person.firstname, we'll see that we get undefined because that key was never defined. Now we're going to do person.firstname equals null, right? And we see that now the key exists, but it has a value of null. And now it has been defined. That key has been defined. So we're going to get null as a value, which is the value of that key. So there's just a little bit of a difference, and you can see how this works with objects. When the key is not defined at all, the value, if you try to access it, will be undefined. But if you specify null, it's just going to show null. Now, this is just something I want to cover. This is not best practices, and you shouldn't create your objects this way. Okay, so let's say that an object was sent to you from some other source with a key specified with a space in between. If we try to do this with the dot notation, you'll see that we get an error. So the only way you can actually access the value on that key is by using the bracket notation. So we would do person, opening bracket, closing bracket with first space name in the middle. And now we can access that value. So just something to keep in mind. If you do have some strange format of keys, you can access them with the bracket notation. Okay, the next thing we want to try is to have an array as part of an object. So let's say we're trying to find a person's work history. So we're going to create a key called work history, and we're going to set the value to an array of strings. So this is a simple array. And when we open up the person object, we see that we now have a work history key with an array of 3 strings specifying where the person has worked, right? Okay, so now let's try something a little more complicated. We're going to do an array of objects as the value of work history. So we're going to reassign the value of work history and set the value equal to an array of object. So we're going to set up the work history key to be an array of objects. And we're going to have the object have the keys of company, title, the starting year, and the end year, right? Okay, and then on this second job, we're going to specify that it doesn't have an end date. Let's say still working there, right? So there's no end. So we're going to say the end is null. Okay, so now let's take a look at our person object, and let's see what that looks like after those changes. Okay, so we have a number value, a Boolean value, a null value, an object, and now we have an array of objects as values within the object, right? And if we click into this object, the first object in the work history, we see that it has keys of company, which is a string. We have the end, which is a number. We have a start, which is a number. And we have the title as a string. And again, we look at the second object within the array, and this one has end as a null value. So this is just to show you that an object can have different data types as the key values. Okay, so let's take another look at the person.workHistory, and we see that it has a length property here, which is showing that it's 2. So it has 2 values within the array. And in this case, those values are objects. So there's 2 objects within this array. Now, the way to access items in the array is through something called an index. So in JavaScript, the index always starts with 0. So we know that whatever the length of the array is, minus 1 is the maximum number we can provide in these square brackets. And we can see here it's showing array 0 and 1 and the object next to it, right? That is the array index. So we can do person.workHistory, opening brackets, 0, closing brackets, and we can access the first object. Now we'll do person.workHistory1, and we can access the second object in that array. So just keep in mind that arrays always start with 0, and it goes up to the amount of items in that array minus 1, since we're starting from 0 and not 1. So if there's 2 items, that becomes 0 and 1. If there's 10 items, that goes from 0 to 9. And that's going to be a key concept you're going to have to understand. Okay, so now we've learned a little bit more advanced things about objects and arrays. So I want you to take the time now, pause the video, and practice these concepts until you feel comfortable. How to access the data within an object, how to make these more complex arrays, how to access the data within arrays. Practice these things and come up with examples of your own until you feel comfortable with this. There's a lot more to learn about objects and arrays, and this is just a beginner's tutorial. And once you master this and you feel comfortable with this, everything else will be much easier to learn. But if you don't understand this and you go on to the more advanced concepts, it's going to be much more difficult. So please take the time and get comfortable with these concepts. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is functions. So you can think of functions as a package of code, which can be reused and executed multiple times in the code. So generally it's used to perform a specific task that you code or to return a value. And we're going to go over some examples that will help you understand this better. Okay, the first thing is how you actually create a function. The first way is using the function keyword, as we're going to see here. And the name of the function is my function example. And we have these open parentheses. then the opening curly braces. And inside of the curly braces where you would write the code for the function. Now in these parentheses is where we would have parameters, which we'll talk about shortly. Okay, so just to demonstrate how this works, we're going to use the console.log function. The simplest way to think about this is that every browser has a built-in object called console. And on this console, there's a function called log. It's not exactly what it is, but it's a simple explanation. So we're going to use that to show you how a function works. And all that does is log a message inside this console that we're looking at now. Okay, so now we have this function that logs 2 plus 2. And the name of the function is myFunctionExample. If we type just myFunctionExample, we see that we have a reference to the function, but it's not executing the function. So to execute the function, we have to do the opening and closing parentheses. Now with this in place, when we press enter, we'll see that it executed the function and it put 4 into the console. So we see that the function code ran. So anytime you want to call a function, you have to have those opening parentheses and closing parentheses to actually execute the function. Okay, so another way to declare a function is this way here. So some people call this a rocket function or arrow function. So how you specify this kind of function is by declaring whether it's a constant or a let. So you use const, the function name, equal, and then we have these opening closing parentheses, equal sign, and the greater than sign. That's the rocket, and the closing and opening braces. So this is the same exact functionality as the previous function, just a different way of showing you how you can create the function. And again, it follows the same rules. If you don't include the opening and closing parentheses when you call the function, you just have a reference to that function. So you have to include the opening and closing parentheses to execute the function. Okay, so we're going to create a simple function called square that takes a number and multiplies it by itself. So we're going to do this with the arrow function. So we're going to do const square equals the parentheses. And in this case, we need to know what number is going to be multiplied by itself. So inside these parentheses, we provide a parameter called num. So what that does is it allows us to access this num as a variable within the object, right? Since we have num as a parameter, we can actually access that and treat it as a variable. So in JavaScript, to multiply a number, we have the star. So we do return num times num. So now we have this function called square. So when we open the parentheses, right now, we have to provide a value that's going to go into what that num will be. So this is called an argument. So the function argument will be mapped to the num in the function. So if I don't provide any value, you'll see we get not a number. And this is the equivalent of putting undefined as an argument. And just to show you, if I do null as a parameter, we get a different value. Now, I know we got 0 as a value, but that's just a funny JavaScript quirk. But just again, to show you that they are different, null and undefined. Okay, so the square function expects an argument. It expects a number so we can multiply it by itself. So this time, let's try it with a number. So we're going to put 2. And we get 4. So we see that it got the number 2 and it multiplied it by itself. And since we're doing a return in the function, what the function actually does is it returns the value. So we can actually assign that value to a variable. So what we're going to do is create a new variable called 2 squared. And we're going to set it equal to the value returned from square 2. Now, since the function is set to return a value, when this runs, 2 squared will get the value that is returned from this function and save it as its variable value. So we see now that 2 squared is equal to 4. Now let's try a function that's a little bit more complicated. So this one takes 3 parameters, 3 numbers. And we're going to do num1 times num2 divided by num3. And it's going to return that value. And in the last example, we only had 1 parameter. In this case, we have 3. Okay, so now when we call this function, we need to provide 3 arguments. So to keep things simple, we'll just use 1, and we'll get 1 as a result. And each of the values we provide as an argument map directly to the parameters specified in the function. So now let's try 1, 2, and 1. So 1 times 2 divided by 1 is 2, and we see that we get 2. Okay, now that we've learned about some basic functionality of functions, take the time now and make a few functions yourself. They don't have to be complicated, but practice the syntax, practice the functionality, how you use them, how you execute a function, and just make some examples yourself, just so you feel comfortable with this, as these are the major building blocks of JavaScript code. So if statements are basically logical conditions. It's a way of determining what code should run and what should not run, or based on a certain criteria, do this, otherwise do this, right? So it's a way of logically separating out code and implementing logic in code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up the persons object. I've already set that up for us, but you can copy what I've done here. So we're assuming we have 3 people, and we're trying to determine who is older than 30 years old. So I've set up an array, right? So we do an array, and each one is an object with the data. As an example, I'm just writing that out, and we continue on the data here and the data here, right? So I've set that up to this person's variable. So now we're going to create a new function. I've already set this up for us. So what we're going to do is create this function, which is the person older than 30? And it's going to receive a person as a parameter, right? It's a single person. And then we're going to do this operation. So if the person is older than 30, log to the console. So here we see this if, and here we have the condition. So inside this condition, we're using the person's age greater than 30. And in these curly braces, we do the actual code that's going to be operated inside that condition. Now, if he's not older than 30, then it goes into this else block, right? So if this matches, if this is true, so this is actually, the inside of this becomes a Boolean, true, false, right? Inside. So if that's true, then we're going to perform this code. If it's not true, then we're going to perform this code. So that's going to be our simple function. Is person older than 30? And we know that the persons is an array, right? So we can access the first persons object and do that. So let's see what we get. So we get this person is older than 30, and we logged the actual person object, and we get me, right? So let's try the next person in the array. And we have this person is older than 30, which is true, right? He's 32. So if we try the second one, this person is only 26 years old, right? Which is what we had here. And just so you know, this is how you add. This is one way of representing a string. If you want to combine the strings together, you do this plus sign in between each new string that's going to be represented. And I'll show you a different way of doing that, but that's one way. Something a little more complicated, right? So we're going to say we have some products. And we're going to call this one product name, product A, price. You can say it's $10. In stock, true, right? And we're just going to copy this so we can make this easier. We're going to do 5 products, and we're going to do that. So we're going to do product B, product C, product D, product E. We're just going to set up different prices here. This is $15, it's $20, and $16.50. And we can say that this one is not in stock. And we can also do back ordered true. Okay, so we have this products array. So Now let's say we're trying to create a function that is to order a product. Const order product, order products. And it receives an array of products to order. Right? It receives an array of products to order. So, okay, so now we need to make sure that everything is in stock, right? So in order to place the order, items should be in stock or back ordered, right? So first we can add in some checks. So let's say if, this is where we can use the for loop. This is a simple way, but there is a better way of doing this later on that we'll go over. This is in the new syntax. We're going to do for let I equals 0. So here we're creating a variable that changes, so we have to use let. I is the variable name, and we're setting it to 0, right? And then the next statement in this for is what it's going to be less than. So how many times are we going to go through this loop? So we need I to continue being increased until products to order dot length. Okay, so products to order is an array, and arrays have a property on them called length. And I'll show you guys this in a moment here. I'm just going to copy this so we don't lose this. So if we do products dot length, we say that it's 5, right? And we have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So arrays get this property, and you can use that anytime. Okay, so we come back here. So this is going to be an array, and that's going to be products ordered to that length, less than. And then we're going to do I plus plus. So what this does is it's just a simple math operation. It takes the value of I and increases it by 1. So if we look at this, what this for is doing is, here's the criteria for the for loop. The first part is where we initialize the variable. The second part is where we set up the criteria for this operation to continue. So what that means is we're going to create this variable I and set it equal to 0. And we're going to increase it by 1 every time it loops through until, and it'll keep doing that until this condition is no longer met, right? So it's like I is equal to 0, and we know that this is 5. So it will go on until we get to 5. And then 5 is going to be equal to 5, so it will stop there. So let's continue on. So then you do the opening curly braces and the closing curly braces, and this is where the for loop code will run on each item in the array with the I equals 0, then 1, then 2, 3, up to products to order array length. In this case, 5, right? So what we're going to do is find the actual product, right? So we have an array of products here, and we need to look at each individual product. So we're going to create a constant. And we have a list of products. So I'm just going to call this one this product. This product is equal to products to order, right? And now, if you remember, here is how we access, right? You can do 0, 1, 2, but we've set up this for loop, right? So we have this I value. And this I value will be going and changing from 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 5. So that's actually for each item in our array. So we can use I here. So now we have this product. I'm actually going to change this to a let, so I can reassign this and show you guys what this looks like. So first, I'm just going to do this. We're going to log this product. So now let's do order products, and let's pass in the array of products, and let's see what happens. So you see we logged each one of those products, right? We have now that code that ran. So let's change this now. Okay, so now we want to add in the if conditions, right? So we want to check if the item should be in stock, or if in order to place an order, the item should be in stock or back ordered, right? So if this product dot in stock. So this is, again, if statement and some condition, right? Because we see that in stock, it's true or false. But we want to see if it's not in stock. So there is something called the not operator. So if you want to do the opposite of something, you can use an exclamation point. And this exclamation point is the not operator. So it does the opposite of what is there. Okay, so I've listed here the different conditional operators that you can use to show you the different criteria in which you can operate your if conditions based off of. So true becomes false. So for example, what ends up happening is actually it's true, but that actually means false, right? So it does the logical opposite of it. Okay, so let's do this. So if this and okay, actually, so the criteria we have is in stock or back ordered, right? So we can also do back ordered. If it's not in stock, and so this is an and operation. It makes it check for both conditions. And this product dot back ordered, right? So in this case, okay, so if it's not in stock and it's not back ordered, then we want to stop the user from being able to do anything. So what we're going to do is there's something called, this is just a function that's built into every browser. We can talk more about this, but we're doing an alert that says product is not in stock and not back ordered. Do you please review your order? And we want it to exit out of this function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a return. Because when you return, it actually exits the function itself. So that will stop it from continuing on. So what will happen is, even if this is at 0 and we run into this situation, it won't continue on the code. It's just going to exit. Okay, so now otherwise we can do else if, right? So now let's say that the product is not in stock. This product is not in stock and it's back ordered. We can do, in a real website, we would do something different, but this is just an example. One of the items is on back order. Please be aware of shipping delays. Right, something like that. We would have some sort of message that would explain that one of the items is back ordered and it's going to be shipped on a delay. Okay, so now we go through all of these. So we have a for condition, which is we initialize a variable, and it's going to continue on until this condition is no longer true. And what it will do is increase I by 1 every time. So then we create a new variable that is going to be products to order with this value, which is going to give us all the items in their array from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we're checking if this product is, so we check product in stock, right? And we use the not operator to see if it's not in stock. And the product is not back ordered. That means that the product doesn't, like we don't have it. Otherwise, if the product is not in stock and it is back ordered, we just display a message that says, please be aware of shipping delays, right? And we can do, I'm going to show you guys a different way of doing this. So let's say for product, and we had talked about this one before. So it's going to be this product dot name, right? So what will happen is when we use this plus, it joins this value and this value together. So it's going to show that. Another way to do the same thing is going to be template literal. So you can actually use the backticks and you can do, let's just copy the same text here. And the reason for this is because we have a variable here, right? If we do this here, we're just going to get that as a string. So this allows us to actually get the variable value, but I'm going to show you a different way. So we're going to copy this. So use the backticks. And in these template literals, we actually have a special syntax. So you put a $, opening curly brace, close curly brace. And within this curly braces, what you can actually do is write variables. So if we copy this, you'll see that this looks like a string. The text editor is showing that, and this looks like a variable. So this is going to be template literal string. Okay, so let's try this. Oops, I've already declared this variable, so I need to do this. So we're changing what order products is. Okay, so I'm going to clear this out. So we have these products, right? And we're going to do order products. And we're going to order all the products available. So we got this message. So one of the items is on back order. Please be aware of shipping delays for product. This product.name product B. Product B, right? And here we saw that template literal. One of the items is on back order. So that was the same thing, right? So I want to show you guys again this what we have here. So now if we have a product that's not in stock and not back ordered, it's going to say not in stock and not back ordered. So let's say we're going to let's say we want to order a new product. I'm just going to set up a new item here. We just want to order one product. I'm going to keep it in the same format so we know what we're looking at. So we're going to do this, right? Okay. And we're going to say back ordered is false and in stock false. So we have an array because the function expects an array and we have one product in here. We're trying to order one product and it's not in stock and it's not back ordered. So now we should get a message that says that it's not in stock and not back ordered. So let's try it. Order products. And here we go. Product is not in stock and not back ordered. Okay, so it says, please review your order. So now we see that it triggered that other condition in the function, right? So you can think of this just as an example of like how complex these functions can get. This is actually very simple. But here we learned about for loops, if statement, else if, and else, right? Okay, I've tried to cram in as much information in less than an hour as I could. And these are the basic building blocks of everything you need to know in JavaScript. Now there's a lot more to learn, but if you understand all of these concepts very well and you're comfortable with them, you will be able to learn the more advanced concepts later. So take the time and make your life easier and understand these things and feel comfortable with them, and then move on to the more advanced concepts, as there is still a lot to learn, but this is going to be the key to making the rest of it much easier. Good luck, and I know you can make it.